Hi, everybody. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rob Kirkland, and this is another episode of Gain Service Academy Admission Consulting. And I'm here today with Captain Trish Penrod. How you doing, Trish?
I'm doing great, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. All right. So, this we're doing this on our traditional audio podcasting platform, but in addition, we've started today with doing video also that we'll be posting on YouTube. So this is a new uh, dawn of a new era for us, where we're going to be video as well as audio broadcasting on this podcast. So look for us on YouTube, or as you have traditionally looked at through the various podcasting applications like Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and others. So today we're going to talk about the waiver process, right? And sort of, this is something that we work with folks a lot on, and it obviously draws a lot of concern by candidates that are trying to get admission to either ROTC program or ROTC scholarship or admission to a service academy. And so, we've had some DoDMERB episodes, and we've talked about DoDMERB in the process, but the waiver process is probably the most nerve wracking, I would say, of any of the processes, because there's just not a lot of there's information out there, but it's a somewhat of a slow process, and it's a little bit opaque, and you're not sure if you're going to get a waiver or not. And so we wanted to kind of talk to you today a little bit more and do a little bit of a deeper dive into this process so that you can understand. And this is based upon our experience in guiding people through this process. Now, we are not part of DoDMERB, but we have studied it, and we believe that we have some insight to give you on this that can be beneficial. So, Trish, what's your maybe you can add a little bit on this yourself, and I know you've worked with people also on getting through this process.
Definitely, sir. It's really, I think there's two schools of thought when it comes to DoDMERB, or people fall into two separate categories. It's either the folks who they're going to be disqualified. It's very upfront, and they're aware of that. They may or may not be aware of that, but the conditions that they have are, hey, this is a disqualifying condition. Or it's the people that have no idea that what they're dealing with or what they've had in the past is a disqualifying condition. So, kind of two different approaches for that. But at the end of the day, both are going to be disqualified and both are going to need waivers. So I think it's a really good thing to talk about.
Right. And so we'll get into the waiver process, but first I think we should probably talk um, about the DoDMER process itself first, and how this kicks off, and when you can expect to go start this process. And so, first of all, DoDMER stands for the Department of Defense Medical Exam Review Board, DoDMER, and that they're folks out of Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy. They're not affiliated with the Air Force Academy, but they are stationed there, and they are a staff of, my guess is somewhere around probably 50 folks total. That'd be my guess. And they have the inevitable duty to determine the medical qualification of probably upwards of 10,000 applicants for all the service academies, all the ROTC programs, pretty much. And then I think there's maybe a few other people that they maybe the uniform health services, and maybe a couple other things that they're responsible for. But they have a very small staff that's got to get through a lot of applications. So they have a very significant responsibility and duty to applicants to the service academies or ROTCs. And so, if you're an applicant to a service academy or ROTC, you're going to you're eventually going to have to go through a medical exam. And when does this take place? So, let's take the service academies first. So, for the service academies, uh, in general, it's when you submit most of your application, or the majority of your application. So, for like Air Force Academy, it's when you submit the second half of the application. the military academy when you submit the majority of the application, and the Naval Academy, again, when you submit the second half of the application. However, it's also based upon your competitiveness too. So each of the academies are going to look at your competitiveness of your file, as well as how much you filled out of the application. And then based on that, they're going to determine whether or not you're cleared for for this process. And the reason they do that is because running somebody through a DoDMERB physical and then that process takes money, and they don't want to send people through the process that that they do not believe can get into a service academy. So,
Ex-
yeah.
exactly. And with that in mind, a lot of people, when you're starting the preliminary application or the pre-candidate questionnaire, right? That's separate from what we're talking about. We're talking about you've completed, you're putting in your letters of recommendation, the folks that you want to write those. It's that second half, which typically happens anywhere from May, June, July of your rising senior year. So we get questions all the time of when can we submit these? Can I start DoDMERB early? Unfortunately, you can't. You have to wait until that second half of the application opens up through the summer timeframe.
Yeah, and you also have to be competitive. Like we deal with candidates, who have not been invited for a DoDMER physical. And right now, at the recording of this podcast, we're at the end of September, and there's still a number of candidates who have not been put in for a physical. And so it's sometimes, sometimes the wheels turn a little bit slowly. Um, but certainly I would say that if, by the end of September, if you filled out the majority of the second part of the application and you've been invited to a DoDMER physical, that's a vote from the service academy that they consider you competitive.
And if you've done those things and you haven't been forwarded to DoDMERB, what would you say, sir? What would you say that the applicant can do, if anything?
Yeah, I would say reach out to your, liaison officer, field force, or blue and gold officer. You can email the academy asking about your status, or you can improve your SAT or ACT score or other things in the application to complete more of the application to show the service academy that you are a strong candidate and interested in the academy. So that's really kind of how you do that, and you can expect to go through your DoDMER physical usually between August and October. I would say would be kind of the big window when you're going to be going through this physical, because they're going to be making determinations on your admissions by December, January at the earliest. So they want to make sure that you've had some time and gotten through this at least signed up for the physical and are actually going about doing it. So that you have enough time to transit the process before they make determinations on admission. So the other is ROTC, and ROTC triggers the DoDMERB uh, 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 medical when you win a scholarship. So that's as early as October, or could be as late as April or May of your senior year. So that's when it triggers. And I think the other important thing to understand is that if you're going for the service academies and ROTC, and you are going through the DoDMER for a service academy, say in October, and you win an ROTC scholarship in January, that same DoDMER counts for ROTC as well as the service academy. So both are valid for your medical qualification.
Another really important point is the timeline for having that qualification status. For the service academies, it's the middle of April of your senior year of high school. That's when the service academies want you to be qualified so that they can give you an appointment. Now, there are a few exceptions to that, but in general, it's around that April 15th deadline versus for ROTC scholarships, really, it's December of your freshman year of college.
Yep, that's right. You can continue to work on your waiver process for the ROTC through the time you're in ROTC in the fall, and you're exactly right, is you have to have medical qualification through DoDMERB in order to uh, receive an appointment to a service academy. So that's a little bit definitely different. You definitely have a longer timeline with ROTC to continue to transit the whole process to getting qualified. So great. So great points there regarding regarding starting the DoDMERB. So Trish, what happens next once the service academy determines that you should get a DoDMERB physical, or you win an ROTC scholarship and you haven't been, you're not applying for a service academy? What happens next?
So the Service Academy or ROTC will forward your name to DoDMERB, and that could take a few days for you to receive the email. Depending on what you're applying for in the portal, you might see an update from the Service Academy or ROTC program that says we've sent your name to DoDMERB. Expect something in return. So you'll get an email, and they'll ask you to create a logon for DoDMETS, which is the system that DoDMERB uses to schedule your appointments and to also take that first questionnaire, which is basically, compiling all of your medical information into one location.
Right. And so you'll sign up for the DoDMETS, which is just basically, as you say, the administrative portion of DoDMERB to sign up for the physical and to fill out the questionnaire. So the first thing you'll do is you'll fill out the questionnaire itself. And the questionnaire is an online questionnaire of 164 questions that are simply a yes and a no for these 164 questions. And if you answer yes, you have to, usually there's a box that pops up underneath when you answer yes, and then you have to fill out uh, a little bit more specifics on this particular thing that you said yes to. Important thing to remember with answering yes, in particular in this process, is that if you go on to the next page, there's maybe five or six questions per page. If you answer yes and then go on to the next page, it locks you out. So you can't go back and answer no. So you got to make sure that if you are answer yes, make sure that you really meant to say yes, and that that you press on yes and then fill that out, because if you're not going to be able to go back later and put no in. So when you're in communication with DoDMERB, you have to explain why you put yes down for that particular question.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also, you can skip questions too. So if as you're going through and you're not really sure, go ahead and skip to the next question, and you'll be able to go back and fill that out. Also, really helpful to have all of your medications on hand, the dates that you were prescribed them, and so the questions are asking, have you? Most of the time, it's do you have now or have you ever? So a lot of times you're looking back and just kind of compiling all of your medical information, having your doctors, having their addresses. All in one place is going to make this just so much less painful as you're going through the process.
Right, and I would recommend that parents and applicants go through this together. Don't Applicants, if you're listening, don't do this alone.
Mm.
Do this together, so that because your parents know, because parents know what the deal is with what happened when the applicant was younger. And we've seen the most success when parents and applicants go through it together and make sure that they are answering it as accurately as possible. So let's talk a little bit about why why does DoDMERB rely so much on this questionnaire?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I think it's because they don't have access to your medical records, and that's a huge misconception, right? Is with we live in the age of technology, everything's digital, so maybe they have access to your medical records. No, they absolutely don't. This is all self-disclosure. There's a huge emphasis on self-disclosure within the DoDMERB process. And it's up to you to be honest and open with DoDMERB regarding things that have happened to you and with your medical history. Now, I mean, that's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, no,
Right, sir?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because, you know, if you answer yes to something, and it wasn't properly diagnosed, you can be digging yourself a hole here that you can't get out of if it was because as soon as you answer yes to something, you're going to have to prove to DoDMERB that this condition is not valid or this condition never took place. And so, what I would recommend to all candidates going through this is that if you answer yes to a question, make sure that it's truly diagnosed by a specialist who knows something about this particular issue. For example, let's just say that you in the past were diagnosed with depression. We've seen through COVID that a lot of times pediatricians, general practitioner doctors have prescribed medication during COVID that without even seeing the patient, was seeing maybe the patient through a video cam or their parents calling up the doctor asking for medication because the son or daughter felt sad or felt depressed during COVID. So you've got to ask yourself the question: Were you truly depressed, and were you diagnosed by somebody who is qualified to give a depression diagnosis? And this can be spread through any sort of diagnosis. So you really, before you answer yes to this questionnaire and understand the impact that yes is going to mean to your medical qualification, you need to be sure that you've been properly diagnosed by a specialist who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, not your parents, not your pediatrician. I mean, you could very well have that condition, but until you're diagnosed by someone who is a specialist, like you said, sir, that's so important.
Yep. And then the self-disclosure piece I'll just go back to is that you mentioned about not having access to the medical records. But, even if, they could get access to the medical records, I mean, remember before we're talking about, 40 some odd people at DoDMERB who have to go through 10,000 medical records. They don't have time to go through every page of your son or daughter's medical records or the applicant's medical records. If they did, it would take them 10 years to get through everybody. And so they rely on you to be honest and to give accurate yes and no answers to these questions so that they can accurately make the decision on whether or not you're medically qualified or not. So just make sure that you do your due diligence and that you disclose what is truly uh, uh, something that you have, so that so that the process is accurate and they can give you the proper uh, determination.
Really good point.
Yep.
So, let's say that you were properly diagnosed and you submit that information to DoDMERB. You're done with the questionnaire. What happens next?
Okay. So so what happens next is you're going to be scheduled for a medical exam and a vision test. So these are very rudimentary exams. They're not in-depth exams. So let's talk about the physical first. So what you're going to do is through the DoDMETs, you're going to be given some times and some locations to take your physical. And then you'll be given some times and some locations to do your eye exam. Then you'll agree to the dates and times for these exams. So oftentimes these exams they're not done by military people. They're done by local civilian contractors by DoDMERB. And so these times they often take place at urgent care centers, maybe around the corner from where you live. Uh, it could be any doctor's office, Descript, anywhere. The eye exam would take place at like a Pearl Vision Center or another, optometry center. It's who's ever been contracted by DoDMERB to give these exams. So when they go in, like for the physical, they're going to give you a check from top to bottom. And it's just going to be a basic physical exam to make sure that that you're physically sound. They're going to give you like a read aloud test, so they don't detect stuttering or other sorts of issues like that. They look to see, they look at your skin, they look at your body, make sure that everything is sound. It's not an in-depth 5-hour exam where they're hooking you up to all sorts of machines and things like that. This is an exam where they're looking at basic things about your physical well-being. Uh, but again, they're not going to be able to detect that you have depression. They may ask you, if you answered yes on depression, they may ask you a question or two about depression, but they're not going to be going into any depth about your depression. They're just there for a basic exam. Remember, these people are GP, general practitioners. They're not specialists in any of these areas, and so they're just contracted by DoDMERB to do a basic physical exam. And so that's the physical. Anything more to add about that? And you can take the eye exam, because I know we've dealt with a candidate in the past, you in particular, that that you can tell them some things about the eye exam.
Absolutely. I think first off, follow the instructions and read everything. You can say that in general for the whole Service Academy or ROTC scholarship application process, but especially for the medical exams, you need to be paying attention to any special instructions. For instance, I was working with a candidate who did not follow the instructions for timelines, right? For contact lenses, you have to take your contact lenses out for, I it's either 2 days or 2 weeks. I can't remember which one it is, but basically, you can't show up to your eye exam unless you've done this. So if you're not following the rules, go ahead and reschedule. Same thing applies for having your best day. You do not want to go to your DoDMERB physical exam when you have a rash that's just popped up. Cancel that. Do not go and reschedule, because these things happen. You might have something that comes out of the woodwork randomly, but once, if you have a candidate that all of a sudden they have a weird rash that they've never had before, and then the doctor writes down that they have psoriasis, well, that is going to be nearly impossible to get off of your record.
Right. And you're going to be fighting this process of trying to get a waiver for it, because it's a history of eczema, a history of psoriasis, or whatever it is. And a history is any time that you've had it. So now what you're doing is you're digging out of a hole for a waiver, because because you've been validated with that condition. So before you go into this physical exam, make sure you check yourself out from top to bottom, and make sure that everything is looking good, and that there's nothing out of the ordinary that you see. So
And
that's
practice that the the speech that you're going to be talking through, right, to make sure that you don't have a stutter. They give it to you in advance. You can see what it is. Go ahead and practice that a few times just to make sure that you're solid when it comes to that.
Yeah, exactly. So good. So you go to your physical, you go to your eye exam, you follow the rules with the both. You really read the instructions. If you're not on your best day, you cancel, and then you do a exam another time. You don't have to go to the exam that they tell you. This is not military orders. You're not in the military. You are not required to do that. So once you are on your best day, you get your basic physical done, you get your eye exam done, right? What happens next? The both of this information goes to DoDMERB at Colorado Springs. So this is when DoDMETS stops, right? This is when things start at DoDMERB now. That means that DoDMETS, you've done your physical, you've done your survey, and so DoDMETS ends, meaning the administrative part of your physical and your questionnaire, and now you're dealing straight with DoDMERB, which to me, I mean, why don't we just deal with DoDMERB at the beginning? Why do DoDMETs and DoDMERB? Don't ask me why, but DoDMERB is what you're dealing with now. So what you do is you have a person at DoDMERB, a person uh, who is in charge of your file. Okay, these people are
Your
not
technician?
doctors. Technician, exactly right. Technician. It's usually your particular, like H through K has one person, and so you see your technician. So your technician is your point of contact at DoDMERB regarding your whether or not you get qualified or not. Okay, so Trish, what do these folks at DoDMERB do once they get your questionnaire and your DoDMERB physical and your vision exam? What do they do at this point?
Well, I think it all comes down to Department of Defense Instruction 6130.03. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a mouthful, but it's DODI 6130.03 for short.
Right.
What is that? That is a massive file with all of the list of things that you could possibly be disqualified for.
Right.
And some of the categories are pretty broad, right? They're not very specific because they're if it's anything that falls into that category could be disqualifying. So, but it's very black and white. It's not personal at all. This technician is not looking at the gray in between. They're saying, okay, is does this student meet any of these categories in DODI 6130.03? So honestly, that's a really good place to start to see if you meet any of these criteria for disqualification, because you're going to be able to find out really easily. You can go into the orthopedic section, you can go into the mental disorder section, any section that you are concerned with, right? And look through all of the disqualifying criteria. And that's where you can find out, okay, oh, my child was diagnosed with asthma, but they had it when they were 8. And the criteria is after the 13th birthday is disqualifying. And no inhaler, no asthma after the 13th birthday. So that would not be disqualifying because the asthma was not diagnosed, was not a factor at age 13. Of course, you're not going to know that unless you read DODI 6130.03. And that's the only thing that the technicians are looking at there. It's very black and white. So if you get disqualified, don't take it personally. It's not personal at all. And now at least you know that, okay, it's time to pursue a waiver.
Right. Okay. So let me just back up one thing here. So let's just say that you put asthma on your, you had asthma in the past and you put down yes. And then underneath, maybe you put a comment block underneath about when you had the asthma. It's most likely what's going to happen in almost all cases is DoDMERB is going to send you a questionnaire to fill out. And this questionnaire is for many different types of conditions. And so it's going to ask you, when you had your last asthmatic episode, when what uh, your uh, prescriptions were and when you had it and things like that. So they're going to ask you for that questionnaire first. So what you'll do is you'll usually as a first step, you'll fill out this questionnaire just so they get a little bit better idea of whether or not you're qualified or not qualified under that particular disqualifier. So again, the disqualifier for asthma is if you've had asthma after the 13th birthday, it's disqualifying. So they're going to be looking at when and that includes if you have been prescribed inhalers or prescribed medications. So they're going to be looking at all that, and if it's clear that you after the 13th birthday that you've had this kind of been either had an asthmatic attack or you continue to be prescribed medication for this, that's a clear disqualifier, and then they're going to issue you a disqualifier. They also may, in other cases that are maybe not, exactly wholly black and white for this. They may then also ask you for medical records. So now they're not going to be asking you for your entire medical history. They're not going to be asking you for every single medical event. They're going to be asking you, they may ask you, for example, with asthma, they may say, send all all pharmacy documentation that has to do with your asthma medication from, for your entire time. So that means you're going to have to make copies, scan copies of your pharmacy records, put those in an email, and then email it to your technician. Then your technician will then post those to kind of a library in DoDMERB that is your own record that DoDMERB has. And then the technician, or a particular technician that maybe specializes in asthma, will then look at all of that and then make a determination of whether or not you get DQ'd or not, based upon the standards, Trish, that you talk about, the DoD instructions. And I would say that, that it's important for people to understand that the people making the disqualification on you are not doctors. Although I believe that the doctors do quality control check what's going on, but it's most likely somebody who's been very well trained on the DoD instruction.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. And it's it's really good, I think, to when you get that questionnaire, that secondary questionnaire. Let's say you filled out that you had asthma and you get that questionnaire, to look at the questions that are being asked on the questionnaire, and then the criteria and the DoD instruction, to make sure that it's very clear, if possible, that you don't meet the disqualification criteria within the answers that you're giving on the questionnaire. Of course, you want to be truthful and honest, but if you can know what that line is and say, okay, I'm to the left of the line, that shouldn't be a disqualifier for me, then you'll have a lot more confidence. Of course, it's always scary when you don't really understand the process, and it's kind of opaque. So that's exactly why we're having this conversation today.
Right, exactly. So then DoDMERB is going to then make a decision on you. So we should talk about two things. There's remedials, right? The remedials is what we talked about. The remedial is request for more medical records, maybe an additional exam at the request of DoDMERB, where they'll either, you can do it at your own cost, or you can have DoDMERB pay for it. I recommend in almost all cases that you strongly consider doing it through your own provider if you can. Because if you know what's going to be disqualifying, you can make sure that you get seen by a doctor, who is going to be absolutely sure that you're disqualified. And if you get one doctor where you're clearly disqualified, then you may want to go to another doctor to check to see that that proper diagnosis was correct. So what I'm saying. So that's sort of what I would say there. And Trish, what do you have to say? Pile on about that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important distinction to make between when you first get your first initial exam from the contracted out doctor. That has to be a government contracted doctor. So you have zero options. But when it comes time for the remedials, when you get additional medical information requests, that's when you can go to the doctor of your own choosing, who's going to have more, probably knows you and more invested in you, and you have more insight and control over what happens and what the outcome of that is.
Right. And then, the doctor's examining you, your private doctor or a specialist you should make them aware of what the DoD disqualification codes are, or what the criteria for disqualification is. So they concentrate on that to make sure that they give you the most accurate diagnoses of whatever condition that you're looking at. So in any event, you'll get this either whether or not you do it for free with a military contract, or you do it on your own dime. You'll fill out the questionnaire, and so they'll look at all of those things. And after they look at all of that and look at the DoD instruction, they'll determine whether or not you're qualified or disqualified based on DoDMERB. And so now we get to the point where we talk about the waiver process, because if you're disqualified for for a particular medical condition, you are then going to be considered for a waiver for whatever service you're applying to. And this is dependent on the ROTC or service academies, whether or not they're going to consider you for a waiver. So it's completely up to them. And so if we talk about the service academies first, I think it's important to understand that they don't even need to consider you for a waiver, even though,
Mhm.
even though something may certainly be deserving of a waiver, you may not even be considered, right?
Yeah, and it's really up to the admissions team to say, hey, we want to pursue a waiver for this candidate or not. And once that happens, let's say that they do want to pursue a waiver, that's when it goes to the Surgeon General or equivalent at each service academy. So, realistically, if you apply to Air Force, Navy, and West Point, you could get a waiver at one, you could get a waiver at all three, you could get a waiver at none. So, but there's really no difference for you. You're only filling out DoDMERB once. You're seeking information, or you're seeking to provide information to those boards, those medical boards at each service academy, but they're all making their own determination as to whether or not you're going to receive a waiver.
Right. So you think of DoDMERB at this point as a library. It's a library of all of the medical information and documentation that you sent to DoDMERB, and the waiver authority, whether it's the surgeon at West Point or the surgeon at the Navy ROTC Naval Command, they go to DoDMERB and they have a link to it, and they electronically and they look at your medical documentation that's in DoDMERB to determine whether or not you should get a waiver or not. So the waiver authority may then also send you information through DoDMERB asking for additional medical information. So beyond what DoDMERB asked you for. So they may be interested in having more information. Like, for example, if you had asthma after the 13th birthday, DoDMERB will disqualify you in general and will not look at the severity of asthma after the 13th birthday. They're just interested in seeing you have asthma after the 13th birthday, you're disqualified. However, a waiver authority is interested in knowing, okay, even though you may have had some asthma after the 13th birthday, was it severe and how long did it take place? For example, if you had very, very minor asthma and it stopped at the 14th birthday, then that indicates to the waiver authority that you don't have asthma anymore, and that you didn't have to use an inhaler, and that they don't have to worry about you, and that they'll grant you a waiver, versus maybe somebody who has been using an inhaler all the way up to to the present day, and is having asthmatic attacks as they're going through the waiver process. So the waiver is more nuanced. The waiver authority will send a message through DoDMERB or a letter through DoDMERB, oftentimes asking for more information in order to determine whether or not someone should get a waiver or not. And I think the other thing, Trish, that you pointed out, I think that's very important, is that this is needs of the service. I mean, this is, what could be wavered off last year may not be wavered off this year.
Mhm.
For example, when I was a professor of military science in 2008, this was in the middle of the Iraq War. Uh, the Army ROTC was wavering off things that they wouldn't waver off now because we needed officers in the Army. And so things that may get a waiver last year that you may read on a discussion board or wherever you get it may not get a waiver this year. Uh, One service, as you said before, may grant a waiver for something, whereas another service will not. For example, color vision. The Navy's very, very they're not going
Tough.
to waiver. They're tough. They're not going to waiver
Mhm.
off color vision deficiency versus Air Force, which will waiver off a color deficiency. So different services treat it in different ways and treat the waiver in different ways, depending also on the needs of the service. So it's important to understand that.
It's also critical to understand that not only is it different between service academies, it's different between Air Force Academy and Air Force ROTC. You could
Right.
get a waiver for Air Force ROTC, but not for Air Force Academy. So realistically, if you're applying to all 5 service academies and all 4 branches of ROTC, you could be up for 9 different waivers for the same thing. You could have up to 9 different authorities that are processing or thinking about, okay, are we going to offer this candidate a waiver or not?
Right. And they are on different timelines and they are offering different rationale to the waiver. And you don't know if you're going to get a waiver or not from any of these. Let's take, for example, a service academy. A service academy has a lot of discretion with waivers. Say, for example, for an athlete who is being heavily recruited may get a waiver for something and may be considered for a waiver that a regular applicant isn't considered for. Certainly, a non competitive candidate for a service academy may not even be considered, but you will be told by the academy that you are being considered for a waiver. So if you're going through and you've been disqualified for DoDMERB and it's December, January, and they haven't put you in for a waiver, it's most likely, since you haven't improved your SAT scores or other things in your application, that should be an indicator to you that they're not going to be considering you for a waiver, and that the admission to the academy is zero. That's basically what it is. So, but then on the other hand, you could have that Army ROTC scholarship, or off the January or March board, they look at you for that waiver after you've done that, and then you get wavered off for that particular issue in March, April. And so you're medically qualified for, off of a waiver for ROTC scholarship, and you would have for the service academy if you had been competitive for an admission to a service academy. Because the reason why the service academy is not going to consider everybody for a waiver is because they don't want to inundate the surgeon USMA or the surgeon Air Force Academy or Naval Academy with hundreds of waivers. They just don't have the time to do it. They want to give the waivers to the people who are competitive.
Yeah, and also to folks who, thinking long term about the services, what is going through that medical professional's mind at West Point? Okay, is this person going to be able to deploy without extra, attention on their deployment? Is this person going to end up with a service connected disability at the end of their service? These are all things that are going through the surgeon's mind when they're making that decision.
Yep. And so the advice we can give to you is make sure that you give them all the pertinent information regarding your condition, so that the waiver authority can make a decision. So this would be, uh, you know, medical exams from your doctors, notes from your doctors, and you can just send those to your DoDMERB technician, who will then post them to the site, so that when the waiver authority goes into the DoDMERB site and takes a look at your medical records, they have everything that they need to make that decision. Now, this decision could take a very, very short period of time, or it could take months, depending upon the number of waivers they're considering and the complexity of your situation. Let me take an easy one for you. An easy one would be if you have astigmatism that exceeds 8 diopters. The military in general, the Army, West Point, or the Army ROTC automatically waivers off to 10 diopters. So that's going to be really quick. You should get a waiver decision on an astigmatism pretty quickly. Another examples, and there's many ones, and we won't go into the details today. This could take months because the doctor, the surgeon may not have enough information to make a decision. It may be an exceedingly complex problem. There just may be all sorts of factors that cause the surgeon to not be able to render a decision immediately. So I know that, when we deal with many clients, there's, they want the decision right away. And unfortunately, it's really difficult to get a quick decision from somebody in this situation, because frankly, they're inundated, with waivers. And for ROTC, for example, when I was professor of military science for Army, they're not just looking at waivers for people who are seniors in high school. They're looking at waivers for freshmen and sophomores in college, who are, kind of on campus and going for medical qualification. So, these people are, have a significant duty and responsibility here, and a lot of, people that they're considering. So it's going to take some time. Now, you mentioned, Trish, earlier that the academies have to get this decision by April in order to determine admission, because if you can't get medically qualified off a waiver, they're going to, have to go on to their, to their waiting list, and they want to make sure that they have these decisions quickly. So it's to your advantage once you get that. Once the academy tells you that that you're going to be considered for a waiver, get your medical documentation together. As a matter of fact, if you know you're going to be disqualified, you can anticipate your disqualification and get your medical records together, so that when they consider you for a waiver, they'll have all the information they need to consider you for that.
And definitely don't wait till the fall of your senior year of high school to complete your application, right? You're going to be disqualified. You have a good understanding that you will. Turn that in early, submit the application in July to start the process.
Right. The more time you have, the more they're going to consider they're just going to you build yourself more cushion. I'm not saying that you're going to get looked at for the waiver, but if they are willing to look at you for the waiver, they're going to have more time to consider it, rather than trying to go down to the last minute. Remember that most appointments are given out for the service academies in January, February, and March. So you don't want this waiver process to be dragging through the spring, because they're going to go on to other people and offer admission to other people. And unless you're a very, very highly qualified candidate, you're likely going to be left behind with this process, because if they're continuing to get you to consider for a waiver, they can't, they've got to, get commitments from people, and it's going to be difficult for them to, kind of hold that slot for you.
So, sir, for folks out there who are going to be disqualified, they already know, or maybe they're wondering whether they're going to be disqualified, how can we help them?
Yeah. So, we help, people, guide them through this process. So, even though we kind of walked you through it here, it's an exceedingly complex process. There's a lot of different agencies that you're working with. I mean, the clients we work with clients through any sort of wherever they are in the process. And we a lot of times we get people who have been going through the waiver process, and that's the point that they approach us at. And I would tell you that, if you can approach us before you start the DoDMERB process, that is the best time to do it, because then we can talk about how to approach this DoDMERB process before you fill out any sort of questionnaire, before you get your medical exam, so that you understand this process. And we go into this with our eyes wide open. But, a lot of times we'll get approached when a person's going through a waiver, and we can help you in any part of this navigation process to kind of just give you kind of that extra set of eyes, our opinion based upon what we know about the process, in order to help you kind of navigate that well. Because the DoDMERB folks are great. They have a lot of really great people there.
Mm.
And the way so in general, your person who manages your DoDMERB file is responsive to you. They have the deputy head of DoDMERB, Larry Mullen, who's very responsive to emails and things like that. So they're willing to answer your questions, but again, they have hundreds of candidates that they're dealing with, and it's difficult for them to get into specifics. In particular, after you're wavered, after you have a disqualification and you go to the waiver authority, it's pretty much radio silence at that point. You're not going to be able to reach out to anybody at any of the waiver authorities to get any sort of status. If you go back to DoDMERB is simply going to tell you that you're waiting on the waiver. And
Yeah.
so they don't, DoDMERB does not have any influence on the waiver. The waiver, and Larry Mullen and anybody at DoDMERB will tell you that the service is the person that is that they make these decisions, and it's based on needs of the service, your competitiveness of your file, and many other factors that they have no control over. And so that's the answer you're going to get. So this is sort of where we step in, I think, to kind of, talk to you a little bit more about this. Talk about, get your chances of a waiver,
Yeah.
what we think you should do, and the steps that you should take. So that's really, I think, what our, role is, kind of, just another set of eyes and ability to kind of be able to give you a perspective on the entire process.
And a lot of parents are just so at the end of the process of working with us, it's like clarity. That's really what we give. We give people a plan of action and a way forward through the disqualification, because that's the scariest part is, oh, I'm disqualified. What does it mean? And walking through that process together can be really reassuring.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, so, please, reach out to us if you're, interested in, learning more about this. And, we certainly hope that this podcast episode was helpful to you. We'll post the DoD instructions, and then also post the 164 questions you're going to get from the medical questionnaire. So you all can see what the standards are and what the questions are going to ask you, so you can get a really, really good idea of what the standards are, as well as the questions that are being asked. So I'll post that in the both on YouTube and in the podcast app.
Excellent. Well, until next time, sir.
All right, all right. So good. So looking forward to it, and we'll see you next time, Trish.